Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article is speaking about housing rights of the urban poor. What is the context? The Supreme Court of India has issued an order. This order is asking the authorities to remove all the slums that is across the railway tracks in Delhi. Why? Because this falls under the railway safety zone. It has also asked the authorities to prevent any type of encroachments in the near future and remove these encroachments in the next 3 months, anticipating that there would be certain political reactions, political interference. It has also asked the authorities that there should be no interference, whether it is political or any other interference, when it comes to the execution of removing all these slums. Now the question is the Supreme Court of India right when it comes to passing of this judgment? This, according to the author, is wrong and has certain flaws in it. What are these flaws? He bases its arguments on the basis of violation of natural justice, judicial precedent, and the state policies governing the evictions. Let's try and understand each of these and the concerns voiced by the author with respect to this issue. The first issue is with respect to natural justice. What is this natural justice? Basically, there will be two parties in any of the petitions, one party, another party, question and a counter question. So both the parties will have to be heard when it comes to any case for that matter. But in this particular case, what we actually witness is all those people who are living in that particular slums were not heard, and because they were not heard, there is a violation of natural justice, and that happens to be the first issue under this article. The second issue is with respect to the judicial precedents. What are these judicial precedents? Let's try and understand this particular issue in a more elaborate way. When it comes to the issue of human rights, this can be divided into two broad categories. One, it includes the civil and political, which can also be called as the first generation rights. Then it includes social, economic, and cultural rights, or what is also called as second generation rights. What is this civil and political or first generation rights? This is basically negative in nature. What is negative here? When you look at the fundamental rights, most of the fundamental rights at least are negative in nature. Why? Because it is asking the state not to do this activity. It is asking the state not to conduct such an activity. It is restricting the state within the confines of the constitutionalism principle. So what is negative here? It is asking the state not to do something so that the state does not become tyrannical in the near future. And at the same time, it also imposes certain fundamental rights so that all these fundamental rights will have to be guaranteed. When it comes to the first generation right, when we speak about right to life, it is right to life. When we speak about right to freedom of expression, it would be right to freedom of expression. There would not be multiple interpretations when it comes to the first generation rights. But what happens in second generation rights? In the second generation rights, you have the Supreme Court of India, which is interpreting a single article into multiple different segmentations. So what do we mean by it? Let's say, for example, we have Article 21. Article 21 under the first generation right will only speak about right to life, but what are the interpretations of right to life is espoused in the second generation rights. Under Article 21, you also have right to livelihood, you also have right to privacy, you also have to right to environment as well. This means what was initially not provided under the first generation rights is provided under the second generation rights. So why are we discussing all this? That is because when you look at the judicial precedents, one of the important landmark judgments when it comes to the interpretation of Article 21, which speaks about right to life and giving it a new meaning of right to livelihood, came in Olga Teles and others versus the Bombay Municipal Corporation and others in the year 1985. So what was originally right to life, which was present under the first generation rights, was interpreted, elaborated, and a new meaning was given to it under Olga Teles case. Why is this important? That is because UPSC in the past has asked questions with respect to the landmark judgments. In the past, it has asked questions about IR Koilo case, so there could be a possibility where UPSC can ask about Olga Tellis as well. So what is this case all about? Let me give you the brief gist of it and we'll understand what is the ultimate analysis of the Supreme Court. What happens is you have number of people who come to Bombay, now Mumbai. Back then it was Bombay. So what happens is Bombay is also known as the city of dreams. Why? Because people come there, they look for livelihood mechanism, they want to explore their life and they also want to live their lives with their family members. So the people from the rural areas migrate to the city of Mumbai. So what exactly happens? Because these people are poor, because they do not have enough opportunities, because they cannot pay more for the rents that are present in Bombay, they live in slum areas and on roads and pavements. So what happens? There was an announcement made by the Chief Minister of Maharashtra. He said that all those people living in the slum areas, in the pavements, on the roads will have to start vacating. But what we have to understand is that all these people do not want to live here as well, but they are living because of crisis in their own lives. It also means that in case they have to move to a different area, all that they have to do is travel from a long places, and this means more expenses when it comes to their job opportunities and when it comes to savings as well. So these people usually occupy those areas because they have to travel less and they can go close by to their working places. This was not taken into consideration by the Chief Minister and the government back then. In fact, the Chief Minister of Maharashtra also said that Police Commissioner will have to assist the Bombay Municipal Corporation in helping and carrying out this mass eviction and demolition drive. The Municipal Corporation of Bombay went ahead and ordered the removal of these encroachments under the Mumbai Municipal Corporation Act of 1888. This also means that there are specific sections under this particular law which is speaking about section 314, which allows this particular authority to evict people without even giving time or without even asking them to respond as well, which means the principle of natural justice is violated under this particular scenario. Why? Because they're not given time and there is no prior notice as well. This is when these people were represented in the Supreme Court of India. They initially go to Bombay High Court and they finally enter the Supreme Court of India. When they go to the Supreme Court of India, they make a simple argument. The argument is, back then you did not have right to livelihood, which was part of the Article 21. So what was the argument put forward by this particular petitioners? So the petitioner said there is right to life. Right to life also should include right to livelihood. Why? Because in case there is no work, in case that person is not able to take care of him, in case that person does not have livelihood sources, it also means that he would not be able to lead a dignified life, which means there is Article 21 which is speaking about right to life. So right to life will be taken away, snatched away from this particular person, and all of us in this particular slum have moved from our rural areas and are living in the slum areas. Why? Because we are making livelihood from this very region. In case you are removing us from this particular place, you are snatching away our livelihood, which means you are taking away our right to life, is what was the petitioner's argument. The Supreme Court looked into all these issues and ultimately it came out with the judgment. So the Supreme Court said yes, this particular idea of right to livelihood is to be incorporated in Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. It said that right to livelihood is important and they cannot be taken away or evicted without any notice or without even being heard when it comes to this particular case. So the Supreme Court brought the socio-economic rights within the sweep of Part 3 of the Indian Constitution. What was originally not present under the first generation rights is now included under the second generation right, which also makes sure that there is socio and economic perspective added into Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. So the Supreme Court's reasoning goes in line with the petitioner and they say that right to livelihood is part of Article 21 and the same was also espoused and supported by the Supreme Court of India. So kindly remember, the right to livelihood becomes part of Article 21 in this particular judgment of Olga Tellis. The next important judicial landmark is with respect to Chameli Singh versus the state of Uttar Pradesh in the year 1995. In this particular judgment, the Supreme Court said that right to shelter is also a component of right to life under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. Then we have another judgment, Sudama Singh and others versus Government of Delhi in the year 2010. This was a judgment given by the High Court of Delhi. What was this judgment? Let's say there are people who are living in the slum areas. In case they have to be evicted in the near future, conduct a survey in this very region. After conducting the survey, ask their opinion. After their opinion is asked, you are giving value to the natural justice because you are asking the party which is being evicted, and after this is done, you also have to provide the reallocation plans and the rehabilitation plans for these people who have been evicted. This was the judgment given by the High Court of Delhi. In line with this, the Delhi High Court came up with a legislation called as Delhi Slum and JJ Rehabilitation and Reallocation Policy of 2015. According to this legislation, which is a case specific with respect to one of the slums, they would be provided an alternative accommodation, says this particular legislation. They would be provided accommodation within the same plot or within a radius of 5 kilometer, and in case of an exceptional circumstances, they will also be provided with the accommodation greater than 5 kilometer. So ideally they would be provided all the rehabilitation provisions, but in case they are not able to provide within the 5 kilometer radius, then it will be after 5 kilometer radius, says this very legislation. This was again reiterated in Ajay Mekan and others versus the Union of India, where there was one of the demolition of Shakur Basti on the railway land. This is where the Delhi High Court invoked the very idea of right to city to uphold the housing rights of the slum dwellers. So neither the case laws nor the state policies have been referred in this particular case, says the author of this article. So the principle of natural justice is violated, the principle of judicial precedence of the Supreme Court is violated, and the state policy and the legislation made by the state is not considered under this judgment, says the author of this article. So what are the various concerns? The concerns is that, as we see, we have Delhi, which has become one of the places where there has been increasing cases of COVID-19 as well. So amidst all the crisis of COVID-19, in another 3 months, is it the right decision to evict these people? In case this Supreme Court judgment is put into practice, it is the people who will be evicted who will be at the greater risk of life, says the first major concern. The second major concern is that Supreme Court is also the court of precedence. In case you have a particular judgment given by the Supreme Court of India, you have multiple high courts which will take this precedent and they can also implement in their states as well. So in the near future, there could also be a possibility where certain rights can be snatched away due to political compulsions, and the state government may give these decisions which can violate the right to livelihood or the right to shelter, and this particular precedent can be followed by the High Court because of the precedent given by the Supreme Court, is the second major concern. What is the way forward? They have to make sure that they take up the legal approach following this case up. They have to make sure that their housing rights are intact and their voice is heard, and rehabilitation plan in case is coming up will happen only after their process, only after their voice is considered, is what this article all about. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about 5-point action plan. We have External Affairs Minister Jai Shankar, who met his Chinese counterpart, and they have now realized that there has to be reduction of tensions in the line of actual control. In order to ease the tensions, they have now come up with what is called as the 5-point action plan. What is this 5-point action plan? Basically, you have 5 different plans that both India and China will have to implement so that tensions along the line of actual control is reduced. The first important plan says that both the sides will have to take guidance from the consensus of the leaders on developing India-China relations, and at the same time they should not allow differences to become disputes. We have differences between India and China. These differences should not become a dispute and should not increase the tensions is the first major point. The second point says that the current situation in the border areas is not in interest of both the countries. Why? Because both the countries will lose on the economic terms, they will lose the lives of the soldiers. It is not going to serve the purpose either for India or for China. So what do? They will have to continue dialogue, they will have to quickly disengage along the line of actual control, maintain proper distances, and at the same time they have to ease tensions is the second point under the 5-point action plan. The third point says that two sides shall abide by all the pre-existing agreements and protocols on India-China boundary affairs, which means we have number of plans, we have number of programs that are already existing to maintain peace and tranquility along the border areas with respect to India and China. This will have to be taken up, and all the procedures that have been employed previously, like the agreement of 2005 1993, will have to be kept up is the third key point. The two sides further will continue to communicate through the special representatives mechanism and the meetings of the working mechanism for consultation and coordination on border affairs will continue, says the fourth point. From India, we usually have the National Security Advisor going up to the special representatives mechanism to sort out issues between India and China. This will continue further, says the fourth point. The fifth, as the situation eases, the two sides will have to expedite and come up with new confidence building measures to maintain and enhance peace and tranquility in this region is the fifth point given under this 5-point action plan. Now what we have to understand is various concerns with respect to this 5-point action plan. We have also seen in the past as well that China comes up with statements, but when it comes to the execution it does not implement it. So what is the major issue? These are only in words, but when it comes to the execution this is not into reality, and China continues to commit all the blunders and errors and still violates international treaties and confidence building measure. So the problem here is the stark differences still remain. Why the stark differences remain? That is because when you look at the press conference, the objective of India was different and the Chinese objective was totally different. What was India supporting was the cause of peace and tranquility, but the words spoken by China were in totally different connotation is the first major issue. Then you also have the Chinese official news agency which also passes a commentary which says that this issue has been persisting because of India's reckless provocations, telling India to learn from history and reiterating that China will not lose an inch of the territory. This is the provocation given by the Chinese official news agencies while the Minister of External Affairs was interacting with the counterpart from China. So what is the message that China is trying to send is the next important concern. But there is a hope. The hope that these issues will be resolved. Why? Because previously, as these issues and tensions started surfacing along the line of actual control, we did not have the highest level meeting of the Indian as well as the Chinese counterpart. Now we have both these ministers who have met up, and this might give some hope that these tensions will ease along the border. The second reason why there could be reduction in the tensions is because of India's economic sanctions both on the digital front as well as on the physical front as well. China was aspiring to be a digital country. We have United States of America which is able to spread its soft power because of the companies of United States of America. Who does not know Google? Who does not know Facebook? Who does not know Amazon? China was also planning to expand the horizons of information technology. But what has India done? India has hit China where it hurts the most, and that is economics. So because they have banned number of Chinese apps and is also planning to stop importing certain other key important products from China, it has hit China very badly. So when we are hitting China on the economic front, that is where China will recalibrate its approach towards India. And the third important factor is China might have the world's largest army, but India is no less as well. And in order to mobilize the forces in that particular altitude in the Himalayan range, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of money power, it also takes considerable amount amount of pressure that has to be infused for a considerable period of time as well. How long can China keep up this particular tensions along the line of actual control? It cannot continue. Why? Because India is not a small country and we can also hit them back where it deserves it. All this in picture, we can hope that China will reduce the tensions along the line of actual control. But we cannot say so with respect to China as well. So what needs to be done from India's side? India must not fall into the complacency, but instead it has to make sure that it takes all the steps to keep China at bay. The armed forces need to ensure that there is a high level of operational readiness until the onset of the severe winter. In case there is severe winter, they would not be able to approach, and India can hit them back in case they do approach with any type of escalation. For meeting this, what we require is the operational logistic support from the administrative side as well. In case they require ammunition, in case they require any other type of clothing or any other type of logistics from the administrative side to the military side, the same will have to be provided. The political diplomatic initiative will also have to be pumped up as well. They have to make sure that this particular issue does not result in a complete conflict. So making sure that this does not further escalate is the first important factor under the political diplomatic initiative. In case they are not able to restrict, this should be only to the areas of Ladakh, and this should not expand to other regions of Arunachal Pradesh or Sikkim. This is the second key factor. And third, in case it does expand, we should also make sure that this does not lead to two-front conflict with Pakistan as well. In order to prevent the two-front conflict with Pakistan, India will have to have a coordination with United States of America. If United States of America does exert some pressure to Pakistan, we can also avoid the two-front war, so that we can make sure that we are dealing with an exterior enemy, and that is China. So these are some of the things that India will have to ensure. And on the diplomatic front as well, India will also have to make sure that it is in constant talk with the United States of America and hurts China where it hurts the most, and that is in South China Sea, or with respect to Hong Kong, or with respect to Taiwan if it continues to haunt India. So what India needs to do is to isolate China on its insidious role in taking part this current pandemic, and also when it comes to bleeding other countries as well. So what should India do? It should isolate China, where every country starts looking at China in a very negative tinge. If we are able to do, we will also accomplish a positive image that we are not the aggressors, we are only defending our territory. So we would be able to have a positive image across the world as well. Therefore, India should always look at this engagement along the line of actual control. If this does not happen, India should anticipate things and also look at the nefarious designs of the Chinese as well. In case we are able to anticipate, we may also be able to stop them from continuing their belligerent attitude, is what we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about intra-Afghan peace talks. We have the United States of America, which had entered into an agreement with the Taliban. What was this agreement all about? United States of America said that United States of America will be withdrawing its soldiers from Afghanistan. This was one of the clauses. The second was, it also asked Taliban not to let any other radical groups or another terrorist organization to start operating in Afghanistan. So the second argument involved not letting other radical elements to operate in Afghanistan. The third was about intra-Afghan talks. So what are these intra-Afghan talks? You have Taliban on one side, you also have the government that is established on the other side. Both these talk together, they sort out the issue, and that is what is called as the intra-Afghan peace talks. So what is intra-Afghan talks? You have the United States of America, which entered into talks with Taliban. So Taliban will now speak to the government of Afghanistan to sort out the issues of political in nature and also about the ceasefire as well. So sorting out issues, government government control, how the administration has to be, how the government has to conduct its operations in the near future, and how Taliban will have to stop all the killings that is taking place in Afghanistan along with the swap of the prisoners is what is intra-Afghan peace talks. But here is a dilemma when it comes to the intra-Afghan talks. What is it? When it comes to the Afghan government, all that they are saying is we want complete ceasefire first. So what is this ceasefire? Basically, the Taliban is currently engaged in all the atrocious activities in killing of the people and also bomb blast as well. First, stop this. Let's have a complete ceasefire. Don't engage in the violent activity, and then we will speak about the political affiliations and political talks. This is what the government is saying. But what Taliban is saying is that let's sort out this political issue first. Let's understand what is the power differentiation between us and you. And finally, after this is sorted, that is when ceasefire will take place, says the Taliban. So there is dilemma, there is confusion between the government as well as the Taliban. So this has to be sorted as well. Also remember, we have no idea what Taliban is looking from this political process. And at the same time, previously, when the talks were being happening between United States of America and Afghanistan, there were issues of escalating violent issues. Why? That is because they wanted to take these escalating issues as a leverage to sort it out with United States of America so that they can extract more from the United States of America. We are still not sure what is the political affiliation, what is the political settlement that Taliban is looking with respect to the intra-Afghan peace talks. Let's wait and watch. We will see what the government is looking at. We will see what Taliban is looking at. And once they have the discussion, we will take up this analysis once again. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about Jammu and Kashmir Integrated Grievance Readdress and Monitoring System. We have the Lieutenant Governor of Jammu and Kashmir who has come up with this grievance addressal mechanism. What is this all about? You have the civil society, you have the public on one side, you also have the government on the other side. They require a bridge so that all the issues that are faced by the people are looked into by the government. So the grievance which all the civil society face will have to be known to the government of that particular union territory. So this is acting as a bridge, this is acting as an interface so that people can voice all their concerns and the administration can look into these grievances, look into these issues and ultimately answer their queries so that the welfare state is established between the union territory of Jammu and Kashmir as well as the people of that union territory. So basically you will have the district collectors and deputy commissioners who will act as the principal nodes for receiving, disposing and monitoring all the grievances of the civil society. The decision basically is aimed at providing an accountable administration to the citizens of Jammu and Kashmir. As of now, this is what we have to understand, but we will have more editorials and columns going forward. Once we have them, once we have what exactly is this all about, we will have an elaborate discussion once again. Now let's look into some of the preliminary practice questions. The Battle of Saragrahi was fought between the Sikhs who were in the service of British against, is it Japan, Pashtuns, Nepal or Burma? The answer to this is Pashtuns. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. So what is this Battle of Saragrahi? Basically you have one of the forts called as Saragrahi, which is the communication center between Fort Gulistan and Fort Lot using the heliographic signal communication. This was guarded by 21 Sikh. So they were representing the British Indian Army. You also had the Pashtuns who were about 10,000 in number. So these 10,000 all of a sudden attacked this Saragrahi fort, and these 21 valiant Sikh men were outnumbered by the Pashtun and they fought valiantly. Ultimately, they fought a long battle for nearly 7 hours, and because they ran low out of their ammunition, they breathed their last. So it was 21 Sikh men who fought against 10,000 Pashtun tribals. Because they were outnumbered, they were not able to win this very battle. So this is what this article all about. Now let's look into the next practice question. Which of the following are correctly matched? Nathula, Sikkim, Niti Pass, Uttarakhand, Konka Pass, Ladakh. The answer to this is 1, 2 and 3. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. So kindly remember, we have the Gonka Pass which is in Ladakh, Niti Pass in Uttarakhand Uttarakhand and Nathula Pass in Sikkim. This article here is drawing an historical comparison of 1962 war and how there are similar chances that can happen in the current situation. So it is asking the government of India to be sure and also look at the nefarious designs of the Chinese. We have discussed them couple of times as well, and that is why we are not taking up this article. But from the preliminary examination point of view, kindly remember we have the Gongka Pass in Ladakh. Now let's look into the next practice question. Consider the following statement with respect to the net present value. It is the upfront payment that a user has to make for diverting forest land for non-forest uses. NPV came into being after a committee led by Professor Kanchan Gupta developed it. It is uniform for all type of forests. Which of the above statements are incorrect? Since it is asking for the incorrect statement, the answer to this is 3 only. Why? Because this NPV is not uniform for all the type of forest, but it is different. It depends on the canopy as well as the density of the forest, and it is not the same. So the NPV is calculated depending on the canopy density and the quality of forest, and it is not uniform for every type of forest. So what is this NPV? Basically, whenever there is a mining activity or there is a conduction of a new type of economic activity in the forest area, what we are doing is we are actually destroying the ecosystem of the forest, and in order to ensure this conservation of the forest, they have to make sure that a particular money is deposited, and that particular money, the upfront payment that is made for diverting the forest land for the non-forest uses like mining, is what is called as net present value. So the money collected will be used for afforestation and reforestation in that very area. The Supreme Court in 2002 mandated this particular order, and then the NPV came into being after Professor Kanchan Gupta, who is from the Institute of Economic Growth, developed it based on the mandate from the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court gave a mandate in the year 2002, and that is why Kanchan Gupta committee introduced this particular program. Now let's look into the next practice question. With reference to the Climate Smart Cities Assessment Framework, which of the following statements is or correct? It is launched by the Ministry of Environment. It intends to inculcate a climate sensitive approach to urban planning. Which of the statements are correct? The answer to this is 2 only. Why? Because this is not the Ministry of Environment. It is instead Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. So kindly remember, we have taken up this because of the mention under this article. It also mentions about the Streets for People challenge. So what is the Streets for People challenge? This is to make all the citizens pedestrian friendly so that they are able to walk in a friendly atmosphere and in a vibrant street as well. So this Street for People challenge is all about making the city pedestrian friendly. And we also have this particular Climate Smart Cities Assessment Framework, which is all about making sure that the cities have climate sensitive approach to urban planning as well as development in India. It basically has about 28 indicators across 5 different categories. So what are these categories? Energy and green building, urban planning, green cover and biodiversity, mobility and air quality, water management and waste management. So what is that we have to understand? The objective of this particular program is combating the climate change while we plan and implement all the schemes and programs. Now let's look into the next practice question. Disguised unemployment generally means large number of people remain unemployed, alternative employment is not available, marginal productivity of labor is zero. This is the right answer. So the answer to this is C. Now let's look into the mains practice question. The Supreme Court has moved from merely recognizing fundamental rights, which are negative obligations preventing the state from acting in a certain manner, to elevating them to the level of positive duties to be performed by the state. Explain the statement with the help of the judicial ruling. The 5-point action plan initiated to ease tensions must not allow India fall into complacency, but more measures have to be taken to forestall Chinese belligerence. Discuss. So please write all your answers on the comment section. Peer review, come up with constructive criticism. This is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.